A millionaire was working late one night when he received a mysterious phone call. It was a number he had given his former love 7 years ago, known only to her. When he answered, a little girl's voice whispered, "Mom said the first time only hurts a bit," stunning him. Moments later, he bolted from his home, racing out to rescue the child. It poured down, as if trying to wash away the city's murky dealings, yet it only left a deeper, seeping gloom across every inch of pavement. From the 88th floor of the Vantage Point building, Lucas Grant gazed down at the blurry streetlights below. The amber liquid in the glass he held had warmed, though not a drop had been consumed. At 42, owning a fortune most people only dreamt of, Lucas felt more like a captive in his own expansive penthouse. He glanced over at the computer monitors still blinking with the red and green flashes of the newly opened Tokyo stock market. The numbers danced wildly, but they were meaningless. The silence in the room was the heaviest weight pressing down on his chest, just like the constant memory of the woman he loved, Sarah. 7 years had passed since she walked away, driven off by his relentless, heartless focus on his career. Suddenly, a shrill sound tore through the quiet night, echoing from a dark corner of the room. Lucas jumped, the wine in his glass splashing onto the rug. He spun around, staring at the dusty, antique landline phone. It was the sole item he had kept from his old, dingy apartment, and only one person knew that private number. It had been silent for 7 long years. Lucas's heart pounded a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He walked toward it, each step heavy as if weighted with lead. His hand reached out, hovering above the receiver, trembling slightly. Could it be her, or just a cruel trick of fate? He lifted the handset. Sarah. There was no familiar response. Instead, a massive thunderclap roared directly into his ear, mixed with the sound of wind whistling through loose window seals. Then, a quick young breath spoke. "Mister, are you Mr. Lucas?" Lucas frowned, gripping the receiver until his knuckles turned white. A child's voice, not Sarah. "Who is this? How did you get this number?" Silence stretched on the other end, broken only by a stifled, quiet sniffle. "I found your number in Mommy's blue notebook. My mommy's asleep now. Mister, are you buying belts? I have an old leather belt I want to sell." "A belt?" Lucas repeated, confusion mingling with crushing disappointment. "Listen, kid, late at night isn't the time for games. Hang up and go to sleep." "Don't hang up!" The girl shrieked, instantly lowering her voice to a frantic whisper, as if afraid someone might overhear. "I'm not playing. It hurts so much. I'm using this belt from Frank, my dad. My stepmother Maya said the first time doing this only hurts a bit, but you have to pull it real tight. Pull until you can't anymore. That's how you get used to it." Lucas froze. His entire body went rigid. The phrases, "pull it real tight," "first time hurts," "Frank, my dad." Those disjointed pieces locked together, forming a horrifying, dark picture in his mind. Was a child being forced into something painful right now? Being abused? Harmed? "What are you talking about?" Lucas's voice cracked, the cold detachment of the executive completely gone. "Who told you to tighten what? Where are you right now?" The girl's breathing grew heavier, as if her lungs were being squeezed. "I'm by the sign with the broken red light. Mister, it hurts so bad. Mommy said if I pull it tight, the feeling will go away, but I still feel the pain." Lucas lost all control. He hurled the wine glass onto the floor and lunged toward his desk, slamming his hand onto the emergency alarm button for his private security detail. The computer screens in front of him flared to lifelines of code racing as they attempted to trace the call. "Listen to me," Lucas yelled into the phone, trying to overpower the sound of the rain. "Do not hang up. Absolutely do not hang up. I'm coming right now. What is your name?" "I'm Lily." A blinking red dot appeared on the digital map. South Side. The neighborhood known as the Rusty Nail. A place even the police were reluctant to patrol after dark. Lucas stared at the location, a chill running down his spine. Suddenly, a terrifying creak of floorboards sounded from the other end of the line. Heavy, staggering footsteps were approaching. "Lily, who is that? Who's coming?" Lucas roared. "Who are you talking to, you little pest?" A man's slurred, coarse voice cut through, followed by a loud impact. "Ouch, don't, Dad!" Click. The sound of the phone dropping onto a hard wooden floor. Then a cold, endless dial tone as desolate as the storm outside. Lucas's hand dropped limp, the receiver dangling from the cord. He didn't wait for the elevator. He burst out of the penthouse door, his bare feet sprinting down the emergency stairwell. As he ran, he pulled out his cell phone, dialing his head of security, his voice distorted by fury and raw fear. "Bring everyone to the south side. Now force entry if you have to. Find that child." The storm still roared like a wounded beast, but the sound of the rain couldn't drown out the pounding footsteps of Lucas on the cracked pavement. The black sedan skidded to a stop in front of the dilapidated Rusty Nail apartment building, its headlights cutting through the murky night, illuminating the peeling paint and moldy walls. Lucas didn't wait for his protection detail to open the door. He leaped out, his hair plastered to his forehead, his eyes blazing with a mix of rage and terror. The building's main entrance door had rotted long ago. A hard shove from the lead security officer burst it open, revealing a pitch-black stairwell reeking of dampness, sour food, and the cheap alcohol common to neglected, impoverished neighborhoods. Heavy steps echoed down the narrow corridor, disturbing the sewer rodents scavenging through the trash. Lucas raced up to the fourth floor, his breathing ragged not from exertion, but from the tension clutching his heart. Apartment 4B was at the end of the hall, its wooden door warped and chipped. He didn't knock. He slammed the unlocked door inward, ready to confront whatever monster was hiding inside. But there was no monster in the shadows. The room was dark, lit only by the faint flickering light of the broken neon sign outside, casting ghoulish shadows on the walls. In the corner, huddled on a filthy mattress laid directly on the cold floor, was a small figure. "Lily," Lucas called, his voice faltering. He rushed forward, using his phone's flashlight to pierce the gloom. The light swept across the child's gaunt, pale face. Lucas froze the phone, nearly slipping from his grasp. No vile man was on top of her. There was no physical violation in the dark manner he had imagined. The truth laid bare before him was even more savage. Lily was using a rough, thick leather belt, a man's belt wrapped around her abdomen. Her tiny, frail hands gripped the end, using all her meager strength to pull it tight. She had cinched it so fiercely that the belt dug deeply into her skin, creating an impossibly tiny waist. "What are you doing?" Lucas dropped to his knees, reaching out to loosen the belt. Lily flinched, opening her eyes. Sunken from lack of sleep and hunger, her eyes darted toward him in terror. She recoiled, tightening her grip on the belt as if her life depended on it. "Don't take it off. Please." Her voice was a weak whisper, almost her last breath. "If you take it off, my belly will be empty. I'm so hungry. Maya said if I pull it tight, my stomach won't growl anymore and I can finally sleep." Lucas was thunderstruck. His hand hovered in the air. Hunger. The degradation of poverty. The child was intentionally inflicting pain, suffocating her own body, merely to trick the gnawing sensation of starvation in her gut. Hot tears welled in Lucas's eyes, mixing with the rainwater on his face. Suddenly, the inner bedroom door creaked open. A wave of stale alcohol fumes wafted out. Frank stumbled into the room holding an empty bottle. His walk was unsteady, his dirty tank top revealing a protruding stomach. He squinted at the flashlight beam, showing no surprise or alarm at finding a stranger in his home. He noticed Lucas's expensive tailored suit, then looked down at his mud-splattered polished leather shoes. A mocking, greedy grin spread across his liquor-puffy face. "Well, well, look who came to visit." Frank leaned against the doorframe, his voice thick. "Coming to pick up the little pest, are we? I knew it. Maya kept rambling about how she had a rich daddy, but I thought she was delusional." Lucas stood up, his pity for Lily instantly hardening into an ice-cold fury directed at the man before him. "You're Frank," Lucas asked, his voice low and dangerous. "You let this child starve to the point where she has to use a belt." Frank spat on the floor, chuckling derisively. "Starving. Everyone in this neighborhood is starving. I'm starving too. Who knows where Maya blew the kids' welfare checks? You're loaded. If you want to take her, you shell out the cash right now." He stepped closer, blocking Lucas's path, using his bulk to cut off the only exit. He wasn't aggressive, just standing there with the smug challenge of a man who believed he held the upper hand. "I've taken care of her for 7 years. Food, clothes, shelter. I'll make you a deal. $50,000, cash, right now, and you can take this burden off my hands." Lucas looked at Frank, a man negotiating the life of a child, as if she were outdated inventory to be liquidated. Utter revulsion rose in his throat. He said nothing, his icy gaze boring into Frank until the smirk vanished from the man's lips. Lucas gave a subtle nod. 2 massive security officers stepped out of the shadows. One moved with lightning speed, snapping handcuffs behind Frank's back and forcing him onto a rickety wooden chair. The other positioned himself between Lucas and the drunken man, hand hovering near his waist, ready for any resistance. "Let me go. I'll sue you for breaking and entering," Frank roared, struggling in vain. Lucas didn't spare him another glance. He turned back, kneeling beside Lily. The girl was still trembling, eyes tightly shut against the pangs of hunger. "Lily, listen to me," Lucas whispered, softening his voice, trying not to frighten her. "I'm going to take you to get food. You will never have to use this again." Gently but firmly, he removed the small, cold hands of Lily from the belt buckle. As the clasp released, the sudden relief of pressure caused her empty stomach to contract violently. "Ugh," Lily moaned in pain, her face contorted, sweat beading on her forehead. She went limp in Lucas's arms, too weak to resist. Lucas lifted her quickly, feeling her weightless skin and bones body through her thin clothing. He turned and strode quickly toward the door, leaving Frank's curses and threats echoing behind him. As they reached the windy hallway, Lily weakly opened her eyes, her small hand clutching Lucas's drenched shirt. "Where is Maya, mister?" Her voice was tiny, dissolving into the sound of the rain. "She promised she would bring me bread." Lucas paused for a second. He looked out at the dark rain, his heart twisting. This child was still waiting for her mother, still believing a promise from the one who had left her starving. He knew rescuing her from that apartment was just the first step. The journey to salvage her damaged spirit was just beginning, and it would be far longer and more agonizing than tonight's storm. "We're going to find some bread, Lily, I promise." "What?" Lucas tightened his embrace on the child and rushed down the dark stairwell, plunging into the night to find a glimmer of light for them both. The sleek black sedan sped through the dense rain, leaving the rusty nail neighborhood to sink back into darkness. Lucas sat motionless in the back seat, still holding the exhausted Lily, who had finally fallen asleep. Her body temperature was ice cold against his wet shirt, a chilling reality that made him shiver at the fragility of this tiny life. The car screeched to a halt in front of the emergency entrance of Northwestern Memorial Hospital. A team of medical professionals was waiting with a gurney and support equipment. As the car door opened, they swarmed forward. Lucas gently placed Lily on the gurney, watching as the doctors quickly wheeled her down the long corridor, the sterile white fluorescent lights reflecting off the cold metal of the medical instruments. Family needs to wait outside, please." A nurse intercepted Lucas as he tried to follow. The automatic glass doors slid shut, separating the two worlds. Lucas stood rooted to the spot, watching Lily's small form disappear behind the white curtains. He turned to President Parker, who had rushed over after Lucas's urgent call. "I need a DNA test," Lucas said, his voice hoarse but firm. "Take the sample now, and a full checkup. I want to know about every scrape on her body." President Parker nodded gravely. "We will begin immediately, Mr. Grant. The results will be available in a few hours." Lucas nodded in acknowledgement, then walked toward a waiting bench at the end of the hall. He sat down, his expensive suit clinging to his skin, rainwater dripping onto the polished tile floor. But he didn't feel the cold. Or rather, the cold outside was nothing compared to the storm raging in his chest. Time crawled by agonizingly slow. The tick of the wall clock was dry and hollow. An hour later, the curtain in the recovery room partially opened. Lucas sprang to his feet, approaching the observation glass. Lily was awake. She was tiny against the layers of white blankets, an IV drip taped to her frail arm. A nurse brought in a food tray with a steaming bowl of hot soup. Lucas held his breath watching. Lily looked at the soup, her eyes lighting up with craving, but instantly darting around in fear. She didn't pick up the spoon right away. The moment the nurse turned her back to leave, Lily snatched the packets of crispy crackers beside the bowl. Her small hands quickly stuffed them under the pillow. Then she laid down, resting her head on the hidden stash, closing her eyes and pretending to sleep. Lucas turned away, suppressing a painful sigh. That wasn't the behavior of a normal child. It was the survival instinct of someone accustomed to starvation, constantly terrified that the next meal would never come. She was hoarding, protecting the only asset she believed had value right now: food. The doctor's office door opened. President Parker stepped out holding a blue folder. He walked over to Lucas, his gaze sympathetic behind his reading glasses. "The results are here, sir." Lucas took the folder. His hand trembled slightly. He took a deep breath and opened the first page. Technical jargon swam before his eyes, but it was all hazy. Only one bolded line stood out clearly. Probability of kinship, 99.99%. Lucas stared at the number. 99%, nearly absolute. He felt no joy. There was no overwhelming sense of happiness like in movies about family reunions. Instead, a colossal stone slab crashed down, crushing his chest. Guilt. Lily was his daughter. The child who had to belt her stomach against hunger in that crumbling apartment shared his blood. The child who hid crackers under her pillow for fear of them being taken was his biological daughter. For the past 7 years, while he sat on plush leather chairs drinking expensive vintage wine, his own child was fighting for survival in a living hell. He had abandoned her. He hadn't even known she existed. His lack of care hadn't just ruined his relationship with Sarah. It had almost been the undoing of their child. Lucas slid down onto the bench, the result sheet fluttering from his hand onto the cold floor. He looked through the glass into the hospital room. Lily was still there, her hands tightly clutching the corner of the pillow where the crackers were hidden. The phone in his suit pocket vibrated. A new message from the private investigator he had hired 2 hours ago to look into Sarah. Found old medical records. You need to see this. Attached was a blurry screenshot of an old faded medical file yellowed with time. Lucas squinted, zooming in on the image. Patient Sarah Miller. Cause of death: postpartum infection, physical exhaustion. This truth was more than devastating. It was a death sentence for his conscience. Lucas stepped out of the private hospital's entrance, the coldness of the Chicago night rain hitting his face, but failing to cool the burning heat consuming his heart. Lily was asleep in the recovery room, under the watch of his 2 most trusted security guards. She needed rest, and he needed answers. Answers about Sarah's death, about the 7 empty years, and about the guilt weighing him down. The black sedan sped into the night, leaving the glamorous downtown area for the west side suburbs. The further they drove, the sparser the streetlights became, and the high-rises gave way to rows of old, crumbling, mildew-stained houses. The Cook County Public Hospital appeared before Lucas like a grim fortress. Its iron gates were rusty, the red brick walls dark and stained by time and dampness. He stepped out of the car, the sound of his expensive leather shoes echoing starkly on the cracked tile of the main lobby. Hard plastic benches were packed with poor patients. The sounds of coughing children crying and weary sighs created a symphony of destitution. Lucas walked straight to the reception desk. The archive manager, a balding, middle-aged man with thick glasses, looked at him with suspicion. But that suspicion quickly evaporated when Lucas placed a gold-plated business card and a thick envelope on the counter. "I need to find the medical records for a patient named Sarah Miller. 7 years ago, November." The manager looked at the envelope, swallowed hard, and hurriedly nodded. He led Lucas through long, dimly lit corridors, down to the damp basement where forgotten files of anonymous or unclaimed patients were stored. Under the flickering fluorescent light, Lucas held the yellowed file dusted with the grime of time. His hand trembled slightly as he turned the thin pages. The cold-typed words appeared before him like knife wounds to the heart. Postpartum infection, severe malnutrition. Lucas closed his eyes, trying to suppress the sharp pain in his chest. Sarah died because she was too weak. She hadn't eaten enough throughout her pregnancy to sustain the child she carried. I remember this girl. A husky voice sounded behind Lucas. He turned. An old nurse, her hair white, was leaning against a filing shelf, her eyes distant as she looked at the folder in his hands. "You knew her?" Lucas asked, his voice fragmented. The nurse nodded slowly, walking closer. How could I forget she was admitted alone on a stormy night, soaking wet and shivering? No family, no belongings, just a small bag with a few cheap baby clothes. She paused as if sifting through painful memories. She was in so much pain. Her labor lasted 6 hours. I offered pain medication, but she adamantly refused. She squeezed my hand and said, "No, that money is for my baby's formula. I can bear it. Please don't administer it, please." Lucas bit his lip hard, the metallic taste of blood spreading in his mouth. Sarah, the tiny girl who cried hysterically over a small paper cut, yet endured the agonizing pain of childbirth just to save a few dollars. She fought until the end to ensure the baby was born healthy. The nurse continued, her voice trembling with emotion. But her body couldn't take it. She was too frail. After the birth, she only had time to look at her baby once before she drifted away. She never woke up. She sighed, pulling a small folded piece of paper from her scrubs pocket and handing it to Lucas. This was still clipped inside her file. I meant to throw it away many times, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Maybe you need it more than I do. Lucas opened the paper. It was the final bill for her hospital stay. The total amount was circled in glaring red ink. Hospital debt $500 USD, $500. Lucas stared at the number. The world around him seemed to collapse, vanishing into a void, leaving only the number 500 dancing before his eyes, mocking and cruel. 7 years ago. The exact day and time recorded on that death certificate. Lucas remembered where he was. He was standing on the rooftop of a 5-star hotel, raising a glass of 1996 Chateau Margaux wine to celebrate the most successful merger of his career. That bottle cost $5,000. He had drained it amidst the congratulations of his partners in the euphoria of a winner. He had spent 10 times the value of Sarah's life in one joyful night. Sarah had died because she lacked $500. She died because she didn't dare use pain medication, didn't dare stay in a better recovery room. She died alone and destitute, while he, the father of her child, was throwing money away just a few miles away. "Why," Lucas whispered, his voice choked. "Why didn't you call me? Why were you so foolish, Sarah?" The old nurse looked at the devastated wealthy man, her eyes revealing unspoken pity mixed with reproach. "No one claimed her body for 2 days," she said softly. "We almost had to send her to the shared charity cremation for the homeless. Thankfully, at the last minute, a woman named Maya arrived. She begged the hospital to let her defer payment of this amount so she could take her friend's body away." Lucas sank down onto the cold hospital floor, crumpling the bill in his fist. The guilt was no longer vague. It was sharp and tangible, like a dagger plunged straight into his heart. He realized that all the wealth and power he currently held were meaningless. They were in fact the most bitter irony fate could offer. He could buy this entire hospital now, but he couldn't buy Sarah's life back for $500. Lucas stood up, staggering out of the damp basement like a ghost. He walked through corridors filled with the poor and the sick, their tired eyes following his solitary figure. He reached the parking lot. The rain hadn't stopped hitting his face with stinging coldness. Beside his luxurious car, the private investigator he had hired was waiting. He wore a gray raincoat and held a damp old cardboard box, its edges frayed by time. "Mr. Grant," the detective said, his voice low and cautious. "I found this in the miserable old boarding house Maya rented before moving to the slum. She left it beneath the floorboards." He handed the box to Lucas. "This is all that's left of Miss Sarah. There's some things inside. I think you need to read them." Lucas took the box. It felt light, but to him now it weighed 1,000 pounds. He nodded his thanks to the detective, opened the car door, and slipped into the confined, quiet space, closing the door firmly to shut out the noisy, cruel world. Lucas placed the cardboard box on his lap, taking a deep breath of the damp, musty smell rising from the old material. He was afraid. For the first time in his life, Lucas Grant, the man who never flinched from any business risk, was terrified to open a simple cardboard box. He tremulously lifted the lid. Inside were cheap items, but they were painstakingly and neatly bundled. A moss green wool sweater worn at the shoulders, the one Sarah always wore the winter they were together. A few blurry black and white ultrasound photos, their edges curled, and at the bottom a stack of handwritten letters tied securely with a faded red ribbon. Lucas picked up the letters. Cheap, thin stationery. He pulled out the first letter. May the 2nd, Lucas. I'm so tired today. The doctor said I'm anemic and need to eat more red meat, but meat is too expensive. I managed to buy some discounted spinach at the supermarket. They said it helps with blood too. I miss the steak dinners you used to take me to. I miss you. I thought about calling you, but I saw it was 2 a.m. You're probably sleeping or working. I'm afraid of bothering someone as busy as you. I put the phone away again. Lucas clenched his jaw, the bitter taste of salt filling his throat. Sarah had never complained to him when they were together. She always smiled, always said, I'm fine. But behind that smile was silent, suffering a loneliness he had never recognized. He flipped through the next letters. August 15th. The baby kicks so hard, Lucas. I named her Lily after the flowers you gave me on the first anniversary of us meeting. I hope she'll be strong, not weak like her mother. Today the landlord demanded the rent again. I had to sell the silver necklace my grandmother gave me to pay for it. I didn't dare call. I'm afraid of the look in your eyes, seeing me as a failure, a burden in your way. Every word was like a needle pricking Lucas's heart. What had he done? He had made the woman he loved believe she was a burden, an obstacle on his path to fame. He had built an invisible wall with his coldness and ambition, pushing her so far away that she would rather starve and sell her keepsakes than ask for help. Lucas's hand shook violently as he pulled out the final letter. It was written on November 14th, the fateful day. The handwriting was messy, rushed, as if scribbled in unbearable pain. Lucas, I'm in so much pain. The contractions are coming fast now. I think the baby is coming. I'm at the hospital alone. I'm so scared, darling. I called you 3 times. I just wanted to hear your voice one last time to give me a little strength to know you were there. But your secretary answered. She said you were in a crucial meeting and couldn't be disturbed. She asked if it was urgent, and I didn't dare tell her. I hung up. I'm sorry I bothered you. The letter ended abruptly there. No farewell, no signature, only desperate silence. Lucas let the letter fall to the car floor. He remembered that day. Clearly, he was in a meeting finalizing the merger terms. His desk phone rang. He glanced at the screen showing Sarah. He had frowned, annoyed that she was calling during business hours. He had switched it to silent, then handed the phone to his secretary, signaling her to answer and say he was busy. I'll call her back later, he had told himself. But that later never came. It was that misplaced priority, that cold wave of the hand, dismissing the call that had severed the final connection, pushing Sarah to die, believing she was unwanted. She died thinking he didn't need her, didn't need this child. Lucas looked at his reflection in the rearview mirror. The man looking back was no longer the successful, powerful executive he was proud of. He saw a killer, an indirect killer who took a life through indifference, through selfishness. Frank and Maya were the present villains. They harmed Lily's body out of greed and cowardice. But he, Lucas Grant, was the original villain. He created this tragedy. He abandoned Sarah, drove her to her death, and indirectly condemned Lily to 7 years in hell. You miserable bastard, Lucas growled, slamming his fist onto the leather-wrapped steering wheel. You are a miserable bastard, Lucas. He buried his head in the wheel, his shoulders shaking. Tears of belated regret fell, soaking his suit sleeve. But what good were tears now Sarah was gone? She would never return to hear his apology. But Lily was still here. The daughter of him and Sarah was still alive, lying in a hospital waiting for someone to save her. Lucas lifted his head, wiping away the tears. The look of anguish slowly turned into fierce determination. He couldn't change the past, he couldn't bring Sarah back. But he had to save the future. He had to save Lily. He would dedicate the rest of his life to making amends, to atoning for this mistake, even if it cost him every asset he owned. Lucas started the car, the engine roaring powerfully. He turned the car around, speeding into the rainy night, heading straight for the private hospital where he had left Lily. 15 minutes later, the sedan braked sharply in front of the hospital entrance. Lucas didn't wait for the security guards. He rushed out, running into the lobby, past the reception desk toward the elevator. As the elevator doors opened on the intensive care floor, a scene of chaos met his eyes. Nurses were scrambling, their faces distraught. The shift supervisor saw Lucas and went pale, trembling as she hurried over. "Mr. Grant, we are so sorry." "What is it?" Lucas stopped dead, a cold feeling running down his spine. "Where is my daughter?" "The little girl. She's vanished." The head nurse stammered near tears. "We were distracted for just a moment changing security shifts. When we returned, the bed was empty. The window was open." "Vanished!" Lucas bellowed, his voice echoing down the hall. "A 7-year-old malnourished child. How could she just disappear from this highly secured hospital?" He shoved the nurse aside, rushing into Lily's room. The stark white bed was empty, the sheets and pillows in disarray. The window leading to the balcony was slightly ajar, the curtain fluttering as rain and wind blew in. Lucas ran onto the balcony, looking down into the pitch-black night. No sign. He turned back frantically, searching under the bed, in the wardrobe, and in the bathroom. "Lily, Lily!" He screamed, the terror of losing his child again, choking his heart, more painful than death itself. He bolted out of the room, running down the long hallway, throwing open the doors of other patients' rooms, ignoring their protests. "Find her now. Lock down the entire hospital. No one leaves or enters." Lucas ordered the security team that had just arrived, his voice frantic. Only one thought remained in his mind. He couldn't lose her. History could not repeat itself. Not this time. Lucas's hurried footsteps echoed through the silent hospital hallway. He threw open every door, searching every corner, his breath coming in gasps from sheer dread. Finally, he found Lily. She hadn't vanished as he feared. In the clean linen storage room at the end of the corridor, tucked between towering stacks of fresh white sheets, Lily sat huddled in the darkest corner. Her wide eyes stared fearfully into the void, her arms tightly wrapped around her knees. "Lily," Lucas called softly, afraid of startling her. "Why are you hiding here?" Lily looked up at him, her voice tiny. "It's too big out there. The bed is too huge. I'm scared." Lucas understood. The VIP hospital room, spacious and clinically sterile, had triggered the primal fear of a child accustomed to cramped, filthy spaces. He gently picked Lily up, feeling her small body still trembling. She didn't resist, silently letting him carry her to the car. In her hands, her frail fingers clutched a dirty old black plastic bag. Inside were the soiled clothes she was wearing when rescued, and a few crushed cracker crumbs. Lucas considered telling her to discard it, but seeing the fierce protectiveness in her eyes, he remained silent. It was all the property she had, the only tangible link to the old world she knew. The car drove through the night, taking them back to the penthouse on the 88th floor. Lucas had called the house manager to prepare everything. A pink room with a princess bed, sheepskin rugs, and dozens of expensive toys. He wanted to make up for lost time, wanting her to live like the princess she was. The private elevator opened directly into the vast living room. The dazzling crystal chandelier illuminated the polished marble floor. Floor-to-ceiling reinforced glass offered a panoramic view of the Chicago skyline, sparkling with lights below. But instead of the delight or amazement Lucas expected, Lily recoiled. She pressed close to Lucas, her eyes wide with terror at the surroundings. The excessive luxury and cleanliness made her feel small, dirty, and out of place. "Don't be afraid, this is your new home," Lucas encouraged, leading Lily through the living room. She walked hesitantly, trying to tiptoe so her entire foot didn't touch the floor. She skirted the walls, avoiding the expensive Persian rug in the center, treating it like a minefield. Lucas opened the door to the bedroom he had prepared. The room was bathed in soft pink, the bed draped with sheer white netting, and plush sheepskin rugs covered the floor. On the bed lay giant teddy bears and delicate porcelain dolls. "Do you like it?" Lucas asked, hoping to see a smile. Lily stood frozen in the doorway. She looked at the room, then down at the oversized hospital gown she was wearing. Suddenly, she dropped to her knees on the wooden floor, her forehead touching the ground. "Mr. Boss," her voice was shaky, as quiet as a mosquito's buzz. "The house is too big. I can't clean it all. Can I just clean the kitchen? I promise I'll eat very little. I won't waste any food." Lucas froze solid. The smile vanished from his face. He stared stunned at his own daughter kneeling before him, begging to be allowed to work as a servant in exchange for shelter and food. "Lily, stand up, sweetie." Lucas knelt gently, lifting her shoulders. "I'm not the boss. I'm your father. You don't have to do anything. This is your home." Lily shook her head frantically, her eyes full of suspicion. "Maya said no one gives anything for free. If you don't work, you'll be thrown out. I know how to wash clothes. I know how to do dishes." Every innocent word was like a knife stabbing into Lucas's heart. In Lily's world, love was a luxury. Everything was a transaction: shelter for labor, food for silence. Lucas reached for a life-sized brown teddy bear on the bed and offered it to Lily. "This is a gift from me. You don't have to do anything. Just be happy." Lily pulled her hand back as if touching fire. She backed away, her back against the wall, shaking her head violently. "I can't take it. Maya said if I accept gifts, I have to do something very scary. I don't want to. I'm so afraid." The raw fear in those clear eyes made Lucas realize the cruel truth. Money, the most powerful weapon he had ever used to solve every problem, was utterly useless here. In fact, it was a barrier that made his daughter fear him even more. Lucas helplessly put the teddy bear on the floor. He realized he couldn't use money to buy back his daughter's childhood or her trust. He was facing a solid fortress built from 7 years of trauma and neglect. "All right, no gifts," Lucas said softly, trying to maintain a calm tone. "You go to sleep. This bed is very comfortable." He left Lily in the room, closing the door, but leaving it unlocked. He went to his study, pulling up the surveillance camera feed he had just had installed in her room. He needed to ensure her safety, but also give her space. The screen showed the pink room. Lily stood still for a long time after he left. She looked at the huge princess bed, touched the silky sheets lightly, then instantly withdrew her hand. She didn't climb into the bed. Instead, Lily pulled the thin blanket down to the floor. She quickly crawled under the bed. In the dark, cramped space beneath the bed frame, Lily curled up like a shrimp, clutching the black plastic bag containing her assets. Only there in the familiar, restricted darkness did she find a sense of safety enough to close her eyes. Lucas sat before his computer screen, watching his daughter sleep under the bed in his $50 million penthouse. Tears streamed down his face, silently falling onto the keyboard. He knew that to pull her out of that psychological under the bed, he would have to fight a battle much harder and longer than any merger he had ever navigated. Just then, the phone on his desk vibrated violently. An urgent news alert flashed on the screen. Breaking news: billionaire Lucas Grant, accused of kidnapping. Victim's foster father alleges power play and child snatching. On the wall-mounted television screen, the image of Frank weeping dramatically before reporters appeared. He was expertly playing the role of a distraught father being crushed by the force of money his beloved foster daughter stolen from him. The drunken man, the one who had left Lily starving, was now playing the part of the exemplary victimized father with sickening brilliance. "He thinks his money gives him the right," Frank wailed into the microphones of dozens of surrounding reporters. "He broke into my home in the middle of the night, assaulted me, and stole the child. I raised her for 7 years, treated her like my own daughter. Now he wants to steal her just because he feels like playing daddy. Where is the law? Where is the justice for poor people like us?" Standing next to him was a shifty-looking lawyer nodding in agreement, adding fuel to the fire with strong words about human rights and the abuse of power by the ultra-rich. Public opinion began to churn. Vicious comments targeting Lucas flooded social media. Lucas turned off the TV, throwing the remote onto the sofa. He wasn't angry. He felt a sharp, cold determination rising within him. Frank had picked the wrong opponent. He thought this was a media war where crocodile tears could win. He didn't know that Lucas Grant never entered a fight he wasn't certain to win. Summon the legal team, right now. To my study, Lucas commanded into the internal phone system, his voice devoid of emotion. I don't want to negotiate. I want to annihilate him, completely. An hour later, 10 of Chicago's top lawyers were in his penthouse. The atmosphere in the study was taut. Lucas tossed the file the private detective had just sent him onto the table. I want everything on this man. Bank transaction history, neighborhood security footage, witness statements, everything. The all-out investigation began that very night. Lucas's team worked with incredible speed and precision. They dug up Frank's past, tracing every minor detail, and the truth began to emerge naked and brutal. Sir, we found Frank's bank statements. The lead lawyer placed a stack of papers on the table. He received Lily's social welfare benefits on the 5th of every month. And here, the transaction history at the Lucky Chip Casino and 3 back alley bars in the South Side. He withdrew all the money the same day he received it. He blew the welfare money meant for an orphan child on gambling and cheap liquor. And Maya, Lucas asked, his eyes still fixed on the damning numbers. We contacted their former neighbors. Another lawyer chimed in, playing an audio recording. A static-filled voice, followed by the fearful tone of an elderly woman. Maya. At first, she loved the little girl. But after she took in Frank, every night we heard screaming, things breaking. Frank beat her terribly. He threatened to throw the child out, threatened to get rid of both mother and child if she dared call the police. She was deathly afraid of him. Gradually, she became withdrawn, didn't dare look at anyone, and didn't dare defend the child anymore. She was just a ghost in that house. Lucas closed his eyes. The complete picture was clear. Frank's cruelty wasn't just in starving Lily. It was in destroying Maya's humanity, turning a woman who was once Sarah's friend into a fearful, complicit ghost. Enough. Lucas opened his eyes, his gaze icy. Prepare the lawsuit. Child endangerment, public funds, fraud, domestic violence. I want him to receive the maximum sentence possible. Zero leniency. The next morning, before the preliminary hearing, Lucas decided to visit Maya at the detention center. He needed to see her. He needed an answer for her 7 years of silence. Maya sat in the visitor's room, gaunt, hollow-eyed, with deep, dark circles. She didn't dare look Lucas in the eye. There was no defiance, no anger, only the resignation of a person who had lost everything. Why? Lucas asked, his voice low but echoing in the small room. Why didn't you call me? Why did you let the child live like that? Maya nervously picked at the hem of her inmate uniform, her voice hoarse, breaking. Frank. He said you would take the child away. He said if I called the police, he would harm Lily. I was afraid. I thought if I stayed silent, if I endured it, at least the little girl would still be alive. She looked up, tears streaming down her cheeks. I was wrong, Lucas. I'm a coward. I promised Sarah I would protect her child, but I let fear turn me into a monster. Lucas looked at the woman before him. The anger in him softened, replaced by a bitter sorrow. Maya was accountable, but she was also a victim of violence and poverty. You will pay for what you've done, Maya, Lucas said, standing up to leave. But Frank will pay 1,000 times more. He walked out of the detention center. The Chicago sky was gray, signaling another imminent rainstorm. He had enough ammunition for tomorrow's trial. He would win. He was sure of it. Early the next morning, the day of the trial, Lucas adjusted his tie in the mirror, his face grim. He stopped by Lily's room before leaving. The door was slightly ajar. Lily was already awake. She wasn't hiding under the bed, but sat huddled on the wide window ledge, gazing out at the pouring rain. In her hands, she clutched the old frayed teddy bear she had brought from the hospital, the only thing she would keep. "Lily," Lucas called softly. She turned around with a start, her eyes wide with anxiety. She looked at his formal suit, knowing he was going somewhere important. "Dad, are you going to see him?" Her voice was shaky. Lucas nodded, walking closer and kneeling to meet her gaze. "I'm going to make sure he can never harm you again." Lily stared at him, her lips tightly pressed. Then she whispered a question that tightened Lucas's heart, more painful than any wound. "If you lose, will he take me back?" He promised. He said if I ever ran away, he would lock me in the closet forever. I'm scared of closets. The primal fear in his daughter's eyes suffocated Lucas. He took her cold little hand and squeezed it gently. "I won't lose, I promise you. No one can take you anywhere. You are safe here." He stood up, turning quickly to hide his reddened eyes. He walked out to the car, his heart filled with granite resolve. Today in court, he wouldn't just be demanding justice for his daughter. He would be burying that dark past forever, ensuring no closet could ever imprison Lily again. Lucas's car stopped in front of the city courthouse, where a crowd of reporters and curious onlookers had already gathered. Lucas stepped out, his face expressionless, but his hands clenched so tightly in his pockets that his fingernails dug into his skin. He wasn't just here to win a lawsuit. He was here to keep a promise to his trembling little girl at home. Inside the courtroom, the tension was thick and heavy. Frank sat in the defendant's chair, wearing a cheap, ill-fitting suit his lawyer had found to make him look more pitiful. He glanced at Lucas with eyes that were both fearful and resentful. The trial began with the shameless defense arguments. Frank's lawyer, a balding man with a reedy voice, stood up and declared eloquently, "Your Honor, my client is a victim of class discrimination. He sheltered a child with no blood relation for 7 years under difficult circumstances. He may not have been perfect, but he did his best. And this man," he pointed at Lucas, "a billionaire who never changed a diaper, now uses his money to steal the child and defame the honor of a poor foster father." Frank bowed his head, dabbing his dry eyes with a tissue, then looked up at the jury, his voice choked with fake emotion. "I love her so much. Lily, Daddy misses you." Lucas remained silent, showing no reaction. He waited for this moment. He signaled his lawyer. "Your Honor, we request permission to present exhibit number 4. Lucas's lawyer said, his voice calm but sharp. The large screen in the courtroom lit up. A video clip extracted from the security camera of the Lucky Chip Casino appeared clearly. 5 months ago. Frank stood at the roulette table holding a thick stack of cash, grinning as the ball landed on a red number. He tipped the staff and ordered expensive liquor. Simultaneously, the screen split in two. The other half showed a black and white video from a convenience store security camera in the south side. The angle showed the back alley. A small, frail figure was rummaging through a trash bin. Lily. She found a moldy piece of bread, dusted it off, and quickly stuffed it into her mouth, looking around nervously as if afraid someone would steal it. The time displayed on both videos matched to the second. The entire courtroom gasped in horror. Murmurs of outrage spread like wildfire. Frank turned ashen, sweating profusely. He stammered, trying to explain something to his lawyer, but the lawyer had already turned away, knowing the game was clearly lost. Order, order. The judge hammered her gavel repeatedly, her face grim with anger. No further arguments were needed. Frank's sentence was declared shortly after. 15 years in prison without parole for charges of child abuse, public funds fraud, and domestic violence. Frank was handcuffed and led away, screaming curses at Lucas in vain. The trial was not over. It was Maya's turn. Maya stepped up to the witness stand. She declined legal representation, standing alone in the large room. Her face was gaunt, her eyes hollow, staring blankly ahead. She admitted all her guilt, her voice flat and mechanical. The neglect, the complicity, the cowardice. When the prosecutor asked, "Does the defendant have anything to say to the plaintiff, Mr. Lucas Grant?" Maya turned her head. Her eyes met Lucas's. In that moment, the hollowness vanished, replaced by a burning fire of pain and accusation. "I was wrong," Maya said, her voice echoing throughout the silent courtroom. "I deserved to be imprisoned. I was a coward who let the monster in our house harm Lily. I was a terrible mother." She paused, taking a deep breath, then looked directly at Lucas as if trying to pierce his soul. "But Lucas, don't forget, you are also guilty. 7 years ago, the night Sarah died, she called you. 3 times. She was in pain, she was terrified, she only wanted to hear the voice of the man she loved one last time. But you didn't answer. You were busy making money. You were busy building your empire." The entire courtroom held its breath. Lucas felt like someone had punched him hard in the chest, sucking all the air out. "If you had answered that call that night," Maya continued, tears now streaming down her cheeks, "Sarah might have survived. Lily wouldn't have fallen into my hands. You stand there in your expensive suit, playing the hero rescuing your daughter. But the truth is, your indifference killed Sarah, and my cowardice killed Lily's spirit." Wait, she looked at him, her gaze penetrating the pain he tried to hide. "Who among us is more cruel, Lucas? I starved the child because I was poor and afraid, but you abandoned her and her mother for what? For ambition." The silence in the courtroom was suffocatingly heavy. No one dared to speak. The judge looked at Lucas, awaiting a rebuttal. But Lucas sat motionless. He couldn't say anything. He couldn't justify himself. Maya's accusation was not a legal attack. It was a verdict of conscience delivered right when he thought he had won. She was right. He had won the case. He had gained custody of his daughter. He had put the villain behind bars. But he had lost the battle of humanity. He was the genesis of this tragedy. Lucas lowered his head, clasping his hands together to hide their trembling. He accepted the brutal truth. The trial ended. Lucas walked out of the courthouse surrounded by reporters. Flashbulbs popped continuously and shouts of congratulations rang out. "How do you feel about justice being served? What will you do next for your daughter?" Lucas didn't answer. He pushed through the crowd, hurrying toward his waiting car. He felt hollow. This victory was deeply bitter. He had destroyed Frank, but Maya's words still echoed in his mind, tearing at his soul. The Chicago sky began to rain again. Heavy drops lashed against the car windows. Lucas sat in the back seat, closing his eyes, trying to dispel the image of Sarah calling in vain. His phone vibrated. A text from his house manager. Lucas opened his eyes, looking at the screen. The short message froze the blood in his veins. "Sir, please come home immediately. Lily has disappeared again. We searched the entire house and cannot find her." The car raced wildly toward the Vantage Point Tower, disregarding traffic laws and safety. In Lucas's mind, only a primal fear surpassed any previous guilt or grief. Lily was gone. Again. He had promised to protect her, promised she would never be harmed, yet. The moment his eyes left her, she vanished. The storm outside was raging louder than ever, as if heaven and earth were punishing him. Lucas ran into the building lobby, his clothes soaked, rushing into the private elevator. As the elevator doors opened on the penthouse floor, a scene of chaos met his eyes. Staff members were running frantically, their faces etched with extreme alarm. "Have you found her?" Lucas roared. The elderly manager shook his head, trembling. "Not yet, sir. We've searched every room, the balcony, the rooftop. No sign of the little girl." Suddenly, the lights in the house flickered and went out. The entire penthouse was plunged into pitch-black darkness. Thunder boomed immediately overhead, shaking the entire building. The local power substation had been struck by lightning. "Flashlights, get flashlights!" Lucas ordered, fumbling in the darkness, turning on his phone's flashlight. He ran into Lily's bedroom. The bed was empty. The teddy bears lay haphazardly on the floor. He shone the light under the bed, her familiar hiding spot, empty. Lucas's heart pounded erratically. He tried to think, where would a terrified child hide? Somewhere dark, small, safe. A memory rushed back. Lily's words this morning before he left. He promised he would lock me in the closet forever. I'm scared of closets, but for a traumatized child, fear sometimes becomes a refuge. The most terrifying place is often where they think no one will look. Lucas spun around, racing toward his master bedroom. He pushed the door open, the flashlight beam sweeping across the luxurious furniture, which now looked like monsters in the dark. He approached the large walk-in closet in the corner of the room. The door was ajar. Lucas held his breath, gently pushing the door open. The flashlight beam penetrated deep inside, passing over rows of expensive hanging suits. In the deepest corner, hidden behind the clothes, a small figure sat, huddled on the wooden floor. Lily. She was shaking violently with every thunderclap outside. Her two hands held something long and soft. Lucas narrowed his eyes. It was one of his silk neckties that had fallen to the floor. Lily was wrapping the tie around her abdomen. She was trying to tie a knot, pulling it tight. A subconscious, repetitive action. When afraid, when insecure, when the world felt like it was crumbling, she reverted to the only coping mechanism she knew, cinching her stomach to disappear, to go numb, to survive. Lucas's heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. He didn't rush forward to rip the tie away like he had that first time in the slum. He understood now. He couldn't take away her twisted sense of security with force. He turned off his phone's flashlight, letting the darkness envelop them both, with only the faint light of lightning flashes outside filtering in. He stepped inside the closet, sitting down on the cold wooden floor, shrinking himself to be on eye level with her. "Lily," he whispered, his voice cracking. Lily flinched, still clutching the tie, her wide eyes staring at him in the darkness. She said nothing, just gasped for air. "It's Dad," Lucas said, tears starting to fall hot and fast down his cheeks. "I'm home." He didn't talk about the trial. He didn't talk about winning. He talked about the only thing that mattered now. "I'm sorry." He choked on a sob. "I'm sorry I didn't answer the phone. 7 years ago, your mother called me. I didn't listen. I'm sorry about the $500. I'm sorry I took so long to find you. I was a terrible man, Lily." For the first time, the powerful Mr. Boss, the man who never bowed to anyone, was weeping, uncontrollably vulnerable and exposed in front of his 7-year-old daughter. He confessed his sins, not asking for forgiveness, only wanting her to know the depth of his pain. Lily stopped shaking. She looked at the giant man shrinking before her. She felt his pain. It was like her pain. It was real. Her tiny hands slowly loosened their grip on the silk tie. It fell to the floor, lying still like a dead snake. Lily reached into her sleepwear pocket. She rummaged for a moment, then pulled out something wrapped in a crumpled napkin. She opened it. A dry, hard piece of bread that she had hidden from breakfast. She broke the piece of bread in two. One half larger, one half smaller. Lily offered the larger half to Lucas. "Mr. Dad, please don't cry anymore." Her voice was small, but clear. "Are you hungry? I'm sharing this with you. If you eat it, the tummy ache goes away. If you eat it, the thunder won't be scary anymore." Lucas stared, stunned, at the bread in her hand. To Lily, this was treasure sustenance, the most precious thing she had to protect herself. And she was offering it to him. It wasn't just a piece of food, it was acceptance. It was forgiveness. Lucas tremulously took the half piece of bread. He brought it to his mouth and took a bite. It was dry, hard, and tasteless, but to him it was the best, most sacred meal of his life. He swallowed the bread along with his tears. He leaned forward and wrapped Lily in a tight embrace. "Thank you, sweetie. Thank you." Lily wrapped her small, frail arms around his neck too. She leaned her head into his shoulder, letting out a soft, relieved sigh. The invisible barrier between the father and daughter completely collapsed in that cramped closet. Outside, the storm began to recede, the thunder fading, yielding to a peaceful silence. The two sat hugging each other in the darkness, sharing warmth and the rhythm of their heartbeats. Lucas gently stroked her tangled hair, whispering a promise into the night. "Starting tomorrow, we will rebuild everything, Lily, beginning with a delicious breakfast. I promise you will never have to hide bread again. Winter in Chicago is notoriously harsh, long and brutal. But when spring arrives, the city transforms magically. as if it had never known the deep freeze. Bright sunlight streams through the skyscrapers, reflecting dazzlingly on the clear blue surface of Lake Michigan. On the 88th floor of the Vantage Point Tower, the change wasn't limited to the view outside the window. The penthouse, once dubbed the Ice Palace of the reclusive billionaire Lucas Grant, was now filled with life. The heavy velvet curtains that once blocked the windows day and night had been replaced with thin white voile, welcoming the full sunshine. The previously cold marble floors were now dotted with vibrant green potted plants, ferns, pothos, and especially pure white lily flowers in full bloom, their delicate fragrance filling the living room. In the modern open kitchen, the sizzling of oil and the savory aroma of bacon replaced the deathly silence of the past. Lucas Grant stood before the stove, a spatula in hand, his face concentrating harder than he ever did signing a billion-dollar merger contract. He was no longer wearing his expensive tailor-made Italian suit, his tie cinched tight around his throat. Instead, he wore simple gray cotton t-shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms and a blue apron featuring a cute teddy bear, Lily's first birthday gift to him, bought with her own savings. "Darn it," Lucas muttered as the yolk of an egg broke slightly at the edge. He sighed, shaking his head with a wry smile. Managing a financial empire was far easier than making a perfect over-easy egg. A year had passed since that fateful rainy night. A year of dizzying changes that even Lucas had not anticipated. He had sold off 40% of his shares in Grant Investment, stepping down from the direct CEO role to transition into an advisory capacity. Now, most of his time and passion were channeled into Sarah's Hope, the nonprofit charity he founded to provide medical aid, legal support, and housing for single mothers in crisis. He didn't want anyone else to die over $500. He didn't want any child to endure Lily's fate. "Dad, is breakfast ready?" A bright voice rang out, interrupting Lucas's thoughts. The sound of quick feet thumping on the wooden floor. Lily burst into the kitchen like a small whirlwind. The 8-year-old was starkly different from the frail, pale image of a year ago. Her cheeks were plump and rosy, her eyes sparkled, and her brown hair was neatly braided into pigtails. She wore a bright yellow floral dress, looking like a little sunflower bathed in the sunny kitchen. "Ready right now, princess?" Lucas smiled skillfully, sliding the eggs and bacon onto a plate. Lily climbed onto the tall stool at the kitchen bar, her legs swinging happily. She inhaled the aroma, her eyes shining. "Runny yolk. You're so good at this, Dad." Lucas placed the plate in front of her, then poured a full glass of fresh milk. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching his daughter eat heartily. There were no more crackers hidden under pillows, no more nervous darting glances while holding a spoon, no more sleepless nights spent curled up under the bed. Lily now ate naturally, savoring every bite, sometimes dropping crumbs on her shirt and giggling. She trusted that the next meal would always arrive. She believed she was safe. "Is it good, sweetie?" Lucas asked, wiping a smudge of ketchup from Lily's lip. "Super duper good." Lily gave him a thumbs up, her mouth still full. "But hurry up, Dad, we're going to be late for the park. There's a book fair today. I want to buy the next Harry Potter book." All right, I'll go change right now," Lucas chuckled, taking off his apron. He headed toward his study to grab his wallet and car keys. This room had once been a prison, confining him to sleepless nights in front of computer screens. It was still where he worked, but the atmosphere was completely different. The windows were always open, and on his desk, instead of thick piles of corporate files, were Lily's colorful framed doodles. Lucas stopped in front of the wall opposite his desk. There in the center, illuminated by a small spotlight, was neither a certificate for a business achievement nor a golden trophy or photos with famous politicians. It was a small rectangular glass enclosure with a simple oak frame. Inside the frame, hanging neatly against a black velvet background, was an old leather belt. The leather was cracked and frayed at the edges. The metal buckle was rusty and dull. It was Frank's belt, the belt that had once been cinched tightly around Lily's abdomen, leaving painful dark bruises on her tiny body. Lucas stood silently looking at it. There had been times when he wanted to burn it to erase every trace of that miserable man from his daughter's life. But then he decided to keep it. He kept it not to harbor resentment. Frank was serving his sentence and his name was no longer mentioned in this house. He kept the belt as a perpetual reminder, a permanent warning to himself. Whenever he felt the urge to be drawn back into the corporate grind, whenever he considered missing dinner with his daughter for an important meeting, whenever he considered silencing an unfamiliar call. He looked at this belt. It reminded him of the cost of indifference. It reminded him that the apathy of a good person can sometimes be crueler than overt evil. It reminded him of Lily's ragged breaths that stormy night and the piece of dry bread she shared with him in the closet. The scar on Lily's stomach had faded, with time healed by love and care. But the scar in Lucas's heart, the mark of regret, would always remain. He didn't want it to vanish. He needed its dull ache to keep his heart awake, to always cherish the most precious thing right before his eyes. "Dad, why are you taking so long?" Lily's voice echoed from the living room, pulling Lucas from his somber reflection. The study door flew open. Lily peered in her face, feigning a pout. "Are you looking at that ugly belt again?" Lucas turned, smiling gently. "Yes, I was thinking of replacing it with a picture you drew." Lily dashed into the room, grabbing his hand to pull him away. "Replace it, Dad. I drew a much better picture of you and me walking in the park. That thing is old and gross. Just toss it." Lucas looked at her, his eyes filled with love. "Yes, it's old, but it reminds me how lucky I am to have you." Lily looked up at him, her clear blue eyes blinking. She understood in her own way. She knew her father kept it because he loved her so much that he wanted to remember her pain so he would never hurt her again. "I feel lucky too," Lily whispered, then squeezed his hand tightly. "Come on, Dad, someone's going to buy all the Harry Potter books." Lucas laughed, letting his daughter lead him. Before stepping out of the room, he glanced back at the glass enclosure one last time, then reached out and turned off the study light. The room settled into a soft gloom, leaving the belt lying silently in the display case, a historical witness that had fulfilled its purpose. Father and daughter walked out the penthouse main door. Sunlight flooded the common hallway, brilliant and warm. "It's a beautiful day, isn't it, Dad?" Lily said, skipping. "Very beautiful," Lucas replied, locking the door. They walked along the long corridor. The father's tall, strong shadow and the daughter's small, energetic shadow stretched out on the floor, intertwined. "Dad," Lily looked up. "What are we having for dinner tonight? What do you want to eat? Pizza, extra cheese. Pizza. Okay, extra cheese pizza. And a salad, young lady." "Oh, come on, Dad. No salad. No deal. You have to eat your greens to grow big and strong." Lily's clear laughter echoed through the space, mixing with Lucas's deep, firm voice. The elevator doors opened to receive them, then closed permanently, sealing away the ghosts of the past. Outside, the rain had stopped in Chicago. Spring had truly arrived, bringing with it the green sprouts of rebirth and hope blooming from wounds that had finally healed. And that concludes tonight's bedtime story. We hope Lucas and Lily's journey, a story of profound loss, unimaginable neglect, and the power of redemption, has resonated deeply with you. It's a journey that reminds us that even the deepest, oldest wounds can begin to heal with genuine love and commitment. We'd love to know what touched your heart the most tonight. Did Lucas's ultimate choice to prioritize his daughter over his empire strike a chord? Or was it Lily's incredible strength and the simple, profound act of sharing that piece of bread that moved you? Thank you so much for staying with us through this heartwarming story. We appreciate you taking the time to listen. If there is one lesson we can take away from this touching story, it's this: sometimes the greatest treasures in life, love, family, and connection, are obscured not by distance, but by distraction. Never let a 5-minute meeting or a $5,000 expense overshadow the value of a single heartfelt phone call. The most precious investments we can make are always in the people we love. Until next time, take care of yourselves and those closest to you. Good night.